But with that, let's jump into some Iowa football talk, some Kirk Ferentz thoughts. He met with the media after the Iowa Open spring practice was concluded, and he said, combined a couple of quotes here. Quote, overall, the spring was good. It was productive for us. Saw growth pretty much top to bottom with the roster. I think our leadership base was surprisingly good, which maybe we haven't, Chris, talked or thought enough about that with Iowa. The amount that this group is replacing, you kind of just assume that Mark Gronowski, when he's healthy, is going to be this tremendous leader for Iowa offensively. When you have that kind of player that has the kind of production you can see scrolling at the bottom of the screen here, naturally folks are going to follow that guy, right? But what do you make of just the leadership department for Iowa? I thought that was a good quote from Kirk Ferentz, that he feels good about what the Hawkeyes have in the way of leadership. And that's minus Mark Gronowski, at least as a active participant in every part of the word, active participant, right, throughout the spring. I know he did a little bit of work, but he feels good about the leadership even without Gronowski fully involved.
Yeah, man. And, in terms of Mark Gronowski, he was a 3-time captain at South Dakota State for a reason. You don't just, or North Dakota State, I'm sorry. Or South North. Why am I
South
blanking?
Dakota State.
South Dakota State.
Go Jackrabbits.
Yeah. Well, he was a 3-time captain for a reason. When you see that, you don't get nominated 3 times to be a captain if you're not a leader. So it's nice to have some leadership at the quarterback, but also what we lost in, the guys like Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, some of those established guys, those veterans, Wyatt Black, I'm sure. You need some guys to step up and kind of take the reins. We mentioned in our old shows like TJ Hall, we mentioned Xavier Nwampa. Those guys have to step up and be a voice in the locker room, fill the void. And I'm sure that's what Kirk Ferentz is referring to. Just some of those guys that, were maybe some of the younger guys listening last year. Now they're the ones speaking up, and the others have to listen to them. And, we don't necessarily have to go out in the transfer portal. What I'm getting out of that is we don't have to go in the portal and get leaders because we already have them. That's kind of what Iowa's predicated on. That's why Kirk Ferentz has been here so long, because he develops good men and good leaders. So, to me, it's no surprise that, we already have the ones filling in the void of what we lost in the offseason,
Kirk Ferentz made a point to, in his closing remarks, his remarks with the media as the spring phase came to a close. He mentioned a couple of things just in closing beyond the, general comments about, how spring had gone and it's been productive. He, number one, made sure to congratulate Caleb Johnson, which I think every Hawkeye fan would join him in that. The other thing that he made sure to mention was his general frustration with the lack of clarity as it pertains to the House settlement and the roster situation for Iowa and for college football in general. I don't know how deep we want to get into the weeds on that, but I did think it was interesting. And I agree with Kirk on this front. He said about the 105 roster limit, which, again, we think is going to be finalized for July 1st, but again, we don't know because the House settlement has not been ratified. It has not been put fully into motion here. But he said Kirk's worry was that it rewards the people that weren't thinking about what was in the best interest of their players. In other words, Iowa was pretty forthcoming and honest with its players in terms of, hey, this is where you stand in regards to being part of 105, and maybe some other programs didn't do that. And so, Kirk had been a proponent, Chris, of stair-stepping it down, right? Taking it to where you don't just snap the fingers and all of a sudden you're at a 105 roster limit. You go from 125 to 120 to 115 to, so on and so forth, right? But the House settlement didn't the way it was initially written was not written that way. It was, hey, we're going to 105. We're going to 105 tomorrow. And Iowa has operated in that fashion. Now it sounds like it is going to get stair step down. So just one of those things I think that is unfortunate in some ways for Iowa because look, I don't have to tell you, our audience here on Iowa Hawkeyes Primetime Live, about the rich history and success of Hawkeye walk-ons. Maybe a couple of players that could have helped Iowa were kind of, I don't want to say shown the door, but were told where they stood in the pecking order and made decisions to go play in other places. So that was interesting from Kirk.
Yeah, and I believe a lot of situations, most of these situations have their ups and downs, and positives and negatives. And it is, kind of sad for like you said, as for those walk-ons who really want to work and earn for a spot. Now they're kind of, their chances are almost slimmer. But Kirk has always been such a strategic guy with his roster. I mean, that's part of the reason why he's been here for 26, 27 years. And he's always, as you said, he's always kind of been the one to tell guys really early on, hey, this is what it's looking like, or at every step away, very, very communicative. That's kind of the reason why we've been seeing some of these freshmen or sophomore guys transferring out, because he said it in the conference last year. He was very adamant about, hey, we're gonna tell you where you stand, and if you choose to leave, if you want to do what's best for your career, that's okay. Some guys do want to stay; they love the place and they don't want to leave and they want to grind it out. Some guys want to find that opportunity elsewhere. But either way, Kirk is going to tell you straight up how it is. And at the end of the day, that's very respectable. That's why he's one of the most well-respected coaches in college football. So, Josh, it is a tough situation that he's getting put in, but it's nothing that he hasn't seen in his long, very long tenured coaching career.
And he's been adjustable over the last however many years since the transfer portal and NIL, probably the last half decade, right? Where a lot of this came to the forefront in college football. I think Iowa was maybe, I shouldn't say maybe, they were slower to adapt to the transfer portal and being all in. I don't think Iowa today is all in on the transfer portal, but they have made proper use of the transfer portal and understanding how the transfer portal will fit into Iowa's plan, how you can go pick and choose a spot here or there where, for instance, the last couple of weeks, what have we talked a lot about, Chris? That Iowa maybe wanted a cornerback, or Iowa maybe wanted a safety, or I don't know, Iowa could use an offensive tackle, could use a little offensive line help. And give Kirk Ferentz and the Hawkeye staff credit. They have been adjustable over the last couple of years, and they've made proper use out of the transfer portal. I think Nick Jackson is a great example of Iowa getting a player from elsewhere. He comes in and he turns into a guy that's like he was at Virginia, a triple figure tackle guy and a 2-year starter for the Hawkeyes and a really good player. And you're hoping that you've found a couple more of those guys in this portal cycle.
Yeah, I love how you brought up Nick Jackson. First of all, shout out to Nick Jackson for getting that rookie minicamp deal with the Giants. Happy for him for sure. But yeah, he's a prime example. And I remember last year Kirk Ferentz saying how he'd rather kind of develop guys within the program, but he knows the situation that he's in, the times we're living in, and you have to look at the portal. And when you get guys like Bryce George, he's a huge O lineman. Get Mark Gronowski, you get Bryce Hawthorne, the linebacker. You got all these guys coming in. We got Shaheed Barrows, I believe. He's utilizing the portal as he should. And it's hard these days to just recruit out of high school and not look at the portal when there's so many great players in there. And you could argue that in the NIL era, it's easier and harder in the sense to grab players, and money comes into the picture. Now money plays a big part in it, but I believe since the NIL era started, now you could make the case that this is Kirk Ferentz's best recruiting class out the portal. I mean, I don't want to say that yet. We haven't seen them, but just looking at the initials of what they look like, looking at the numbers and what they've done already, it looks like it's his best year in terms of portal additions. We'll see how that plays out, but he's doing a great job adjusting. As an old tenure coach, he's not used to this life, I'm sure, but he's getting there. He's getting there, Josh.
Seth chimes in. Kirk is a goat of roster management. He absolutely is. He's good at it, and though probably they if they and we don't know the 105 player roster limit. That might be a thing by the time we do this show next week, that the House settlement could get finalized and Iowa planned accordingly. And now you don't have to worry about telling guys, hey, we don't have a spot for you come the fall. So Iowa is one step ahead in that regard. And I trust that Kirk Ferentz and Tyler Barnes and the staff, they evaluated the personnel properly to determine where everybody was in the pecking order and who fits in where and where they needed some help. And I'm with you to your point about the transfer portal. I thought it was interesting that the Big Ten Huddle, which they've got a podcast and they're all over the place. If you're looking and consuming Big Ten content out there on X, on Twitter, if you're looking for Big Ten stuff, probably you've seen the Big Ten Huddle. They do a really good job. Whoever's handling the social media work for them, hey, bravo, round of applause. I see a lot of your tweets out there. And anyways, they had their list of Big Ten schools based on the On3 transfer portal evaluator. And they listed every Big Ten school, and it was basically, has the program had a net positive or a net negative based on what they've done via the transfer portal. And Iowa was one of a small group of schools where they thought basically that Iowa had gotten worse from the transfer portal. And Chris, I have to disagree with that vehemently. I don't know how you can look at that with Iowa and think that they got worse via the transfer portal. It might not be littered with just the splashiest of transfer portal additions this side of Mark Gronowski, because I do think Mark Gronowski is a pretty splashy transfer portal addition. Maybe not to everyone, but to educated college football fans. I think they understand what Mark Gronowski can mean for Iowa. But outside of that, okay, I'm with you. Maybe you don't look up and see, okay, that's a former 4-star, former 5-star guy. And oh, by the way, he comes over from Ohio State or Alabama. It's not the Caleb Brown additions that we've seen in the past. But guess what? The Caleb Brown addition, it didn't work for Iowa. So I think that Iowa went and identified players that at positions of need, Chris, can help them. So I don't know how you can look at the situation for Iowa outside of this is just what the On3 recruiting rankings look like, their transfer portal rankings look like. I understand the logic of how it gets to that point, the addition, subtraction, and what their system tells them. Is it a net positive or a net negative? For me, looking at this thing for Iowa, I don't know how you could look at it and say that Iowa hasn't gotten better out of what it's done from the transfer portal.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know. I got to see how they do these rankings. I got to see what's the criteria for this, because it doesn't make sense. If you're looking at the portal, one went in and one went out, what came in for Iowa is, in my opinion, significantly better than what is left. We lost, Brandon Sullivan, we lost. Not good to lose him. Cade, he had an up and down season. But outside of that, there was really nobody too, prominent that left the program. No one that played major minutes outside of the quarterbacks that left the program. Now you bring in Mark Gronowski, who, again, I said it the first episode, got invited to the combine. He's an NFL-bound quarterback. That alone is a W. Then you bring in like Bryce Hawthorne. I saw it somewhere else. I'm blanking on what the source was, but they said that Bryce Hawthorne was one of the best transfers out the FCS level. You get him. Bryce George is a proven winner at Ferris State. I mean, like Shahir Barrows was a guy that we needed after, John Nestor left. I just don't see how you look at Iowa, what we brought in, and say, that we lost. We lost talent. Do they even look at Iowa? I'm not too sure. I would love for them to see what their criteria is. I don't believe they paid attention to Iowa that much to really say, because if they did, I don't see how you could say that Josh, I just don't understand it. I don't know how we got worse. And we didn't.
Well, I don't think they understand how, Iowa works outside of they're just looking at, player ratings as compared to the sheer numbers that Iowa lost as opposed to brought in. Williams at running back, good player. Caleb Brown looked like he could have been a good player for Iowa if he could have handled at times his business off the field, the personal life at times, not making collegiate mistakes or collegiate aged mistakes at times. And then I don't know I can't speak to the in practice picking up or failure to pick up of the playbook, but just didn't totally click for Caleb Brown, even though he looked like somebody that could really help Iowa initially coming in. The tight ends, Grant Leaper and Gavin Hoffman, those are a couple of guys that maybe you would have looked at down the line and said, okay, they could have helped Iowa. The defensive backs, Khalil Tate, John Nestor, we saw a little bit, and it, there were positives. There was some not so great from John Nestor. So I don't know that there's any one player that left Iowa that you say, oh no.
Yeah, the only one that really comes to mind is Brendan Sullivan. He played good for us, and me covering the team, I felt that excitement of what he was able to do on the field, even though he had his lapses every now and then. What he brought to the team was very unique, something that we haven't seen in a little while. And you felt good about at least the end of the season. You're looking at the situation and saying, okay, well, we feel confident with him being our starting quarterback. But when a guy like Mark Gronowski comes in, Brendan Sullivan knows he's probably not going to start. Now he moves on, and I know he committed last week. I believe it was Tulsa. I don't
Tulane.
Tulane. Sorry about that. Yeah. Good for him. He's going to be good for that program. But we and essentially upgraded at that position, and that's the only major piece that we technically lost. Everything else is going to benefit us. Bryce George is going to be a starter, I believe. I believe Bryce Hawthorne has a chance to really be an impact. He Barrows is probably going to be a starter now with John Nestor gone.
Jonah Pace, I thought, did some good things at the open practice.
Yeah.
Pretty sure he was he had the PBU. I'm trying to. It wasn't Hawthorne. It was Jonah Pace. So, a couple of guys that look like they can help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll get into Max White too. I know we lost him as well. That's a semi big piece that we lost, but again, we got better. I don't know what their criteria is, but I believe everyone that at least covers the Hawkeyes and really focuses on Iowa and Iowa itself knows that we did what we had to do and we got better. Our team is looking better overall in terms of portal. Now, we did lose a lot of talent to the league. But in terms of replacing that, we did the best we could. And for that, it's not a decline.
And I think there's excitement about what Sam Phillips at wide receiver can bring for Iowa. I don't think this season, maybe down the road, but Iowa did just add Ty Hudkins, who was at Purdue, comes over now to Iowa. I think Shaheed Barrows, the corner, has a chance to get into that cornerback mix for the Hawkeyes. I think Hudkins, you're looking a little bit further down the line, but he's young. He's got, he's got all 4 years of eligibility left. So that's somebody that can develop in the program. And if Phil Parker looks at a young man and says, yes, we want him in the program, we're going to take a chance on developing him, then look, Phil Parker has earned the right to bring somebody aboard and for everybody to give that stamp of approval to it. The quarterbacks, I mean, look at what Iowa's done in the quarterbacks room. You got Gronowski, you went and added Hank Brown from Auburn. Jimmy Sullivan comes over from Wake Forest, or Jimmy Sullivan, you signed, Jeremy Heklinski, you brought over from Wake Forest through the Ruggiero connection there. And Jackson Stratton, I told you last week, I really think he's got a chance to be Iowa's backup quarterback based on what we saw in the open spring practice. And if he's your third string, there's not a lot of third string guys in college football, I don't think, that are better than Jackson Stratton. So kind of amazing what Iowa lost in its quarterback room, and the way that Tim Lester and company have replenished it, I think says a lot about Tim Lester.
No, yeah, of course. I mean, you look at the improvement he did from, in his what he did last year, how the offense jumped significantly from 2 years ago to last year. And it wasn't nearly as, good as some of the best programs, but it was still a big jump. Now, part of the reason is because our run game was so dominant. But if we could be that good of an offense without the passing game, now imagine with Mark Gronowski. Now, when you see Jackson Stratton improving, you got Hank Brown, who's also he's going to be a good quarterback as well. Now you got those three, not to mention Jimmy Sullivan and Jeremy Heklinski. Now our quarterback room is complete. Now we got some certified passers in there, some certified dart throwers that are going to throw to Sam Phillips, the guy brought in, a Reese Vanderzee, Addison Ostrenga, a Zach Ortworth, a Jacob Gill. Now our passing game's going to get going. Then you still feel confident about our run game because our O line is good. Now when you bring in Bryce George and how big he is, he's going to contribute. We got to feel good about what the offense is going to do. I'm assuming that we're going to be better this upcoming year than last year, even though we lost Caleb Johnson and some others. But in terms of the quarterback room, what a rebuild that is. What a upgrade that is. And Jackson Stratton, he's the only guy that's coming back. You got to figure that he's going to be, if Mark Gronowski goes down for some reason, you got to feel confident that he's going to come in because he knows the playbook and he knows the guys already. He's going to impact the game for sure.
Kirk Ferentz, by the way, he was asked in closing the spring, how do you feel you did via the transfer portal? And while we're talking quarterbacks, he made a point to really thank Brendan Sullivan, which I thought was pretty cool. He talked about how the guys that left, what you don't want is guys sticking around that really aren't sure if they want to be there. And that's just not good for anybody. And then, he made a point to thank Brendan Sullivan. He said he's as good as anybody they've had at Iowa coming in, just in terms of the kind of person he is, the work ethic, his competitiveness. So Kirk made it very clear, Chris, that he and the program are rooting for Brendan Sullivan at Tulane and very thankful and understanding of the situation for Brendan Sullivan, right? I think you and I sat here, and probably anybody that's got an Iowa platform went back and forth about, well, it makes sense for Brendan Sullivan that he's at that point in his career where he's got a season of eligibility left and he wants to go somewhere where he can play.
Of course, and that's exactly what I expect him to do. He's earned the right to get playing time. And as we said in the past episodes, when you bring in a guy like Mark Gronowski, you're not bringing him off the bench. He's gonna start. And as I said earlier in this show, Kirk Ferentz is the guy to tell him straight up, hey, this is what your role is going to be. If you want to leave, we understand. And Brendan Sullivan, if you're a true Hawkeye fan, nobody should be mad about him leaving. You should feel happy that he's going to go somewhere and get the opportunity to showcase his talent because he's a talented guy and he could play football at a high level. So it'll be good to, watch him, at Tulane do his thing, and we'll support him from far. But we got to feel happy with the quarterback that we're getting for sure, because next year, he could be a 2026 draft guy. You don't know.